My son-in-law told me my dog was dead. He showed up on my front porch just before sun, one hand wrapped in gauze, the other holding a cheap aluminum urn, like something you'd grab last minute off a shelf at Walmart. He said my dog Charlie had snapped, said he'd gone after him without warning, said the vet took one look and told him the dog was dangerous, that putting him down was the only responsible thing to do. And I believed him. What else do you do when you're 60 years old grieving your wife, and the only people you've got left in this world are your daughter and the man she chose to marry? 3 days later, a little after 2 in the morning, I found out just how big of an idiot that made me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name's Peter. I'm 60, which these days feels like the warm-up act to old age. I live on the north side of Spokane, Washington, in a little single-story house with beige siding and a sagging back fence that I keep promising I'll fix when my back stops hurting, which is never. My wife Evelyn died last winter. Breast cancer that didn't listen to anybody's plans. She was a nurse for 30-plus years. Spent her whole life helping other people beat the thing that killed her. There's a special kind of cruel in that, but life doesn't consult me before it writes its jokes. The house has been quiet since she left. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. The kind where the refrigerator hum sounds like a freight train at night because there's nothing else left to drown it out. That's where Charlie came in. He was a mutt, mostly German shepherd, with a splash of something softer around the eyes. 80 pounds of fur and seriousness, the kind of dog neighbors cross the street for, until he leans his head into their hand and ruins his own intimidation factor. Evelyn loved him. Said every house needed one soul that was always happy you came home. After she died, it was just me and Charlie. We had our routine. Morning coffee, him watching the yard through the sliding glass door, like he was on patrol, then a slow walk around the block, if my back allowed it. Evenings in front of the TV, with some game on. I wasn't really watching, his head on my shoe reminding me I still existed. And then Mason decided he knew better. Mason is my son-in-law. 41. Contractor. Big pickup, bigger ego. The kind of guy who always smells like cologne and sawdust, even though the last time you saw him actually pick up a tool was never. He married my daughter Leah 6 years ago. I tried to like him. That's what you do when you love your kid, and they bring someone home with bright eyes and a ring. I'd learned to live around the things about him that bothered me. The way he talked over Leah. The way he called me old man like it was a joke, then looked at my hands a little too long when I reached for the Advil. The way his compliments felt like warnings. But until that evening on the porch, he'd never crossed a line I couldn't pretend wasn't there. He didn't knock, just opened the storm door and stepped inside like he owned the place. "Hey, Peter," he said, like we were buddies meeting for a beer. "We need to talk." I was at the kitchen table sorting through mail I didn't care about. Bills, coupons, an offer to buy my house for cash from some LLC with a cartoon roof in the logo. I saw the bandage first wrapped tight around his right hand. Then I saw the urn. My stomach went cold. "Where's Charlie?" I asked. Mason's eyes did this little flicker, like he'd rehearsed this and suddenly forgot his next line. "That's what I came to tell you." He lifted the urn a little, just enough, so the cheap metal caught the light. "He attacked me, Pete. Out of nowhere. I came by to check on the place like we talked about, and he just snapped." He held up his bandaged hand. There were red spots seeping through. It looked bad. It also looked fresh in a way that made something in me squint, but grief doesn't leave much room for cross-examination. I took him straight to the emergency vet, Mason went on. "They said with a bite like this, and his size and your age, it was a liability. They said if he did it again, and you got hurt, they'd be legally required to report it." I made a call. I told them to put him down. The words landed slow like wet sandbags. You, what? My voice came out thinner than I wanted. I know you're upset, he said quickly. Believe me, this wasn't easy. But you live alone, Peter. If that dog turned on you, you really think you could fight him off? You'd bleed out before anyone even knew. He set the urn on the table between us. The sound of metal on wood was soft, but it might as well have been a gunshot. His ashes, he said. I thought you'd want them. I stared at the urn. I kept waiting to feel anger, some kind of fire rising up in me, but all I felt was tired. Bone-deep tired. Evelyn was gone. Now the dog was gone. And here I was, sharing a kitchen with the man who'd just made that decision for me, telling me it was for my own good. I would have gone with him, I managed. If you'd called me. His jaw ticked. You were at your doctor's. Leah told me. I didn't want to upset you until it was done. Look, I get you're emotional. You've been through a lot this year. But I did what needed to be done. There it was. That tone. Like I was a child in the way of grown-ups making grown-up choice. I should have thrown him out. I should have told him that dog was the last thing in this house that made me feel like I wasn't already halfway gone myself. Instead, I nodded, just barely. Because sometimes grief hollows you out so much, there's no room left for fight. After he left, the house felt wrong. Too big. Too quiet. The empty spot by the back door where Charlie's bed used to be felt like a missing tooth you can't stop touching with your tongue. That night, I sat in Evelyn's old recliner, with the TV on mute and the urn on the coffee table in front of me. I kept waiting to hear claws on laminate, the soft huff he made when he lay down, the shake of his collar. Nothing. I don't know when I fell asleep. I know I woke up sometime after 2 a.m. with my neck screaming and my mouth dry as dust. The TV was still on. Some late-night infomercial, bright and loud, and completely disconnected from my life. I got up to get a glass of water. That's when I heard it. Scratching. At first I thought it was the branches on the maple tree hitting the siding. Then it came again. Rhythmic, hard. Like someone digging. I set the glass down and moved toward the sliding glass door at the back of the living room. The yard was mostly dark, just a pale wash from the street lamp, and a little solar light. Evelyn had stuck in one of her old flower beds before she got too sick to care about such things. Out by the back fence near the corner, where we'd put Evelyn's roses after the funeral, something was moving. Dirt flew. A dark shape, low and powerful, was tearing into the ground, like it had a grudge against the earth itself. My heart started pounding. Coyote, I thought. Or some stray. I flipped on the porch light. The shape froze, turned. For a second my brain refused to make sense of it. Then it did, and my knees went weak. Charlie, I whispered. He stood there in the wash of yellow light, chest heaving, sides caked in mud. One ear was torn. There was dried blood in the fur around his neck. His paws were raw claws, broken and dark with dirt, but his eyes, those stupid soft brown eyes, were the same. He took one step toward me, just enough that I knew it wasn't some dream my mind had cooked up to torment me. Then he turned back to the hole and started digging again, harder, faster, throwing dirt behind him. I slid the door open. The night air was cold and smelled like wet soil and pine. Charlie, I called a little louder. Hey, boy. He glanced over his shoulder tail, giving one exhausted thump, and went right back to work. There's a point where your life stops making sense, and all you can do is pick the next thing that feels the least insane. For me in that moment, the least insane thing was to walk barefoot across my cold back deck, step down into the damp grass, and kneel beside a dog I had buried in my heart 3 days ago. Okay, I said, my voice shaking. Okay, buddy. Whatever this is, I'm here. I started digging with my hands, scooping dirt out of the hole he'd started. It was deeper than I expected. The soil was loose on top, from where Mason had dug to plant the roses, but a foot down, it turned hard and packed. My fingers started to ache. Charlie kept going, snorting and pawing, working like his life depended on it. Maybe it did. Maybe mine did. I don't know. I just know that for the first time in months, I didn't feel numb. I felt scared. I felt alive. My fingers hit something solid. Not rock. Flat. Cold. Metal. I brushed more soil away, my breath coming faster now. There was definitely something buried there right under the roots of Evelyn's roses. A corner of dark green metal showed through the dirt. Military green, like an ammo box, or one of those old cash boxes you see at yard sales. Charlie stopped digging. He sat back on his haunches, panting, and looked at me. Not at the hole. At me, like he was saying, there. I did my part. My hands were shaking as I cleared the rest of the dirt off the top. Whatever it was heavy. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to put it there and make sure no one found it. Someone I had just let into my house. I slid my fingers under the edge, felt the weight of it settle into my palms, and lifted. The box came free of the ground with a sucking sound, like the earth didn't want to give it up. I set it down between my knees, heart hammering the night, suddenly very, very quiet. I hadn't opened it yet. I hadn't seen what was inside. But right then, kneeling in the dirt with my dead and not dead dog at my side, and that cold metal box in front of me, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was in there was the reason Mason lied. And it was going to change everything. Before I opened that metal box, before the night blew my life wide open, there was a version of me that thought he still understood the world. I miss that Ian sometimes. He wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but he was steady. Predictable in that comforting old shoe kind of way. I worked 34 years at the same manufacturing plant outside Spokane. The kind of job that leaves your knuckles swollen and your shoulders permanently tight, but you sleep at night, knowing you earned your rest. Evelyn used to say she could track every year of our marriage by the scars on my hands. I liked that. Being useful. Being somebody my wife could lean on. When Evelyn died, that part of me just went quiet. But even before she got sick, even before everything tilted sideways, there were cracks in the wall of this family I pretended not to see. Take Leah, my girl, my only kid. Smart, sharp-tongued, stubborn as an old ranch mule, traits she got straight from her mother. But somewhere around her late 20s, she started pulling away from me. At the time, I thought it was just life happening, jobs, bills, friends, marriage. The usual stuff that takes your kid and turns them into someone who hugs you less and checks their phone more. But looking back, it was more than that. I just didn't want to admit it. I remember one Thanksgiving. This was about a year before Evelyn got sick. We were all at the dinner table. Mason had carved the turkey like he was auditioning for a cooking show, making a big performance out of something that used to take me 10 minutes and a decent knife. Leah reached for a second helping of potatoes, and Mason put his hand too lightly on her wrist. "Babe, didn't you say you were watching carbs this month?" He said it with a smile, but there was something under it. Something sharp. Leah laughed it off, pulled her hand back. "It's Thanksgiving, Mason." "Yeah," he said. "But you know, just thinking of you." I remember the way she looked down after that. The way she pushed her plate away, even though she barely ate. And I remember doing nothing. Just taking a sip of wine like a coward, pretending I didn't see my daughters shrink a little. That wasn't the only moment. There were dozens, maybe hundreds. Once I let myself look backwards, honestly. Mason joking about my bad back. Mason insisting on speaking for Leah when she paused even a second too long. Mason making me feel small in my own home, but in ways that were so damn subtle that I told myself I was imagining it. Grief will make a liar out of you, sure. But denial, that'll rewire your whole memory. The only person who ever called any of it out was Hank. Henry Fletcher, retired Spokane PD. 68. Now built like a refrigerator, and the only man I know who drinks black coffee like it did something personally offensive to him. He and I grew up 2 blocks apart and went through every stupid phase together: bikes, beer, blue-collar adulthood. If Evelyn was my heart, Hank was the stubborn part of my spine that never quite gave up on me. He didn't like Mason from the jump. Not in the old dads. Hate young husbands. Way more in the my instincts kept me alive for 30 years, and something about this guy scratches them wrong way. One afternoon, this was maybe 6 months before Evelyn passed, Hank was over helping me fix the railing on the back deck. Mason had stopped by to borrow a tool and stayed longer than he needed to. Standing too close, talking too loud, smiling with too many teeth. When he finally left, Hank waited until his truck disappeared down the street, then muttered, "That boy's got darkness. He thinks he's hiding." I remember wiping sweat off my forehead, trying to laugh it off. "You're being dramatic, Pete," he said, leaning on the drill, like it was a cane. I've met men like him. Charm first, control second, damage after. And by the time folks see it clear, they're already tied to him. I shrugged him off back then. I didn't want to imagine my daughter had married someone dangerous, not emotionally, not physically, not any kind of dangerous. It was easier to call Hank cynical, easier to say he'd spent too long seeing the worst in people. But a few months later, while Evelyn was in and out of appointments, Hank stopped by on a cold December evening. Snow was coming down sideways. He tracked wet footprints into my living room, and he didn't even apologize. He just held out a small manila envelope. "For Evelyn," he said. "She'll know what to do with it when the time comes." The time comes. I didn't ask questions in that moment, maybe because fear sat too heavy on the back of my tongue. Evelyn did ask, though. She asked him quietly in the kitchen, while I pretended to watch TV. I could hear their voices low, serious. Something metallic in Hank's tone. After he left, she tucked the envelope into her nightstand drawer. Right next to the book she never finished, and her last wedding ring. She kept the original one in a box, because the gold had worn thin after 35 years. She never told me what was in it. Maybe she meant to. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she thought she had more time. I didn't think about that envelope again for months. Not through treatments. Not through the hospice nights. Not through burying the love of my life in frozen ground. But now, kneeling in the dirt with that metal box I hadn't opened yet. My hands were shaking. My heart felt like a fist I'd been clenching since Evelyn died. And all I could think about was the weight of that envelope. For when the time comes, I think I know that time had just come crashing onto my shoulders. I never wanted a memorial garden. Not because I don't miss Evelyn, I do every hour, but because she wasn't that kind of woman. She didn't like anything that required fuss or maintenance. She said plants were too much like people. They need you when they need you, and then one day, they don't, and you're left with empty soil. But Mason showed up a few weeks after the funeral, with a rolled-up sketch and a big smile, the kind that stretches too wide. "Thought I could do something nice for you, Pete," he said, sliding the plans across my kitchen table. "A place where you can sit and feel close to her." It should have been thoughtful. Should have meant something. But right away, something in me twitched. The lines on the sketch weren't sentimental. They were precise. Measurements, depths, things contractors don't draw unless they're building foundations or hiding things. Still, when you're a man grieving, when your daughter's husband says he wants to honor your wife, you say yes. even if your gut whispers no. He started the next morning. I expected a guy with a shovel, maybe a wheelbarrow. But Mason came with power tools, lumber bags of soil that looked industrial, not garden center variety. He dug fast, too deep. Pits 3 feet, 4 feet 5. Deeper than any rose bed needed. When I asked why, he didn't even look up. Drainage, he said. You don't want rot. But the ground here drains fine. I'd planted tomatoes once. Evelyn teased me about it for years. Nothing drowned. Sometimes while he worked, I caught him stepping away to take phone calls. Not loud arguments. Whispers. Short-clipped. Walking all the way around the side of the house so I couldn't hear. Charlie didn't trust him. And dogs, they are honest in ways humans aren't. Every time Mason dug in that back corner, Charlie hovered, nose twitching, tail stiff. He didn't bark, but he watched. Like he was tracking something my old eyes couldn't see. Once I found him pawing that exact corner, late at night, scratching at the dirt, even though Mason had told me he'd laid the first layer of soil. When Mason caught him, everything inside him shifted. His jaw tightened. His eyes went small, mean. Get your dog, he snapped. He's just curious, I said. He squatted low, inches from Charlie's face. Dogs can smell things people can't, he murmured. Not hostile, not loud, but cold. And sometimes, that's a problem. Charlie backed up, ears flat. I told myself, I imagined the malice in Mason's voice. Told myself grief was turning me paranoid. Told myself a lot of things I wish I hadn't. By the second week, Mason's visits grew more frequent. Just checking progress, he'd say. But he wasn't building anymore. He was supervising the dirt. Watching it, adjusting it. Packing it down with his boots. Always eyeing that back corner, like it would jump up and reveal something. Then Leah started coming with him. My daughter used to be sunshine. Loud laugh, messy hair, always reaching for my hand even as an adult. But now she arrived wearing long sleeves in June, tugging them down past her wrists. Smiling too much. Apologizing too quickly. You learn to read your children even when they're grown, even when they are lying to you. Especially then. The first time I saw it, she brushed her hair behind her ear, and her sleeve slid up an inch. Just an inch. Enough. A bruise. Faint yellow at the edges, deep green in the center. I froze. She pulled the sleeve back down fast. How's the garden coming, Dad? There are moments in life where you know the truth in your bones, even if your mind fights it. I didn't want to see the hurt in her eyes and her body, but it was there, plain as day. A truth Evelyn must have seen before I did. I tried to talk to her later one morning when Mason wasn't around, but she flinched like a deer when I said her name gently. And before I could finish the sentence, his truck rolled into the driveway, like he'd been listening for trouble. Need something, Pete? He said too casually. Just talking to my daughter. Well, we gotta run. Long day. His hand clamped on her shoulder, firm, not affectionate. Leah gave me that brittle, breakable smile. See you later, Dad. My worry wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a scream. But fear paralyzes you in strange ways. I told myself I needed more time, more certainty. Told myself I'd talk to her when she was alone, when she wasn't looking over her shoulder every 90 seconds. But Mason made sure she was never alone. One afternoon, not long before he claimed Charlie attacked him, I spotted something that sealed the dread in my stomach, tight as a knot. Mason was kneeling in the corner of the garden, the deep one. He looked over his shoulder to make sure nobody was watching. Then he pulled something from his jacket pocket, a package wrapped tight, dark plastic, and placed it at the bottom of a fresh hole before covering it again. I didn't see the whole thing, but I saw enough. I stepped outside. What was that? He didn't even flinch. Just wiped his hands on his jeans. Fertilizer, he said. Special blend for the roses. Then he did something I'll never forget. Charlie wandered toward us, sniffing curious. Mason's foot shot out fast hard, catching Charlie in the ribs. Not enough to break anything, enough to send a message. Keep him away from here, Mason said under his breath. Dogs can sense things, sometimes too much. He smiled then. That thin smile men wear when they know you can't prove a damn thing. That's the moment I realized something was very wrong. Not the garden, not the roses, not even Mason. Something buried, something Charlie had been trying to tell me long before he clawed his way back home. I remember the day too clearly, the kind of memory that doesn't fade, no matter how much you wish it would. I'd just come back from a follow-up appointment at the VA clinic. Nothing major, just the usual reminders from a young doctor half my age that my joints were wearing out faster than the rest of me. I drove home feeling every one of my 60 years. Missing Evelyn. Missing the version of myself who didn't need a handful of pills to get through a Tuesday. When I pulled into the driveway, Mason was already there. He stood on my porch like he belonged there, shoulders stiff, jaw tight, one hand wrapped in a thick white bandage that looked too clean to be believable. In his other hand he held a small metal urn. My stomach dropped before he even opened his mouth. "Hey, Pete," he said, voice soft, practiced like someone delivering bad news they had rehearsed in the mirror. Something happened. He lifted his bandaged hand just enough for me to see the dark blotch bleeding through the gauze. "It's Charlie," he said. The world narrowed to a small tunnel around his voice. "He attacked me," Mason went on. "Came at me out of nowhere. I tried to calm him down, I swear I did, but he was wild. I had to get stitches. The vet said a dog his size with aggression like that, and with you living alone." He paused, waiting for me to fill in the rest. I didn't. I couldn't. They said putting him down was the safest thing. For everyone. Safe. For everyone. Except the dog who slept at my feet every night of my grieving year. I stared at the urn. I didn't take it. Couldn't make myself touch it. My throat felt tight, too tight to speak, too tight to breathe. My ceased and I finally managed. "Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you?" "I didn't want you to see him like that," he said quickly. "And I didn't want you getting hurt trying to stop him. Look, I know you cared about the dog, but this was the right call. The right call." People say that a lot when they're trying to talk you out of your own instincts. I felt something hollow crack inside me. A quiet break. A private one. The kind you don't show anyone. Mason set the urn on the porch railing, like he was dropping off dry cleaning. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Just try to understand I was thinking of you." He walked off the porch with that same calm, measured stride he always had around me. Like he was the reasonable one. Like he was the man holding my family upright. But he didn't look back. Not once. I stayed on the porch long after his truck was gone. The urn sat there catching the late afternoon sun, mocking me. I finally picked it up, not because I believed him, but because grief makes you cling to anything that resembles the thing you lost. Inside, the house felt wrong, quiet in a way I couldn't stand. I set the urn on the kitchen counter next to Charlie's empty water bowl. That bowl nearly undid me. I leaned against the counter and let myself sink down until I was sitting on the cold tile floor, head in my hands, feeling a sadness so raw it made my bones ache. Losing Evelyn had hollowed me. Losing Charlie felt like someone scooped out what little was left. The phone rang around 7. "Leah. Dad," she said before I even said hello. "I heard what happened. Mason told me. Are you okay?" Her voice was too even, too steady, too quick, like she was reading off a script someone had handed her. "I'm trying," I said. "It wasn't your fault," she said immediately. Charlie was aggressive. Mason had to protect himself. The vet said it was the safest choice. There it was, word for word. I closed my eyes. Leah, I said softly, did he tell you anything else? Anything at all? Silence. Then no. Dad. I have to go. Mason's calling me. And just like that, she was gunny. The house felt smaller after that call. Tighter. Like the walls had moved in an inch or two without warning. Grief plays tricks on you, sure. But this wasn't grief. This was something colder. That night, I tried to sleep. Tried to tell myself Mason had panicked. That maybe there was some awful truth I couldn't face. That maybe Charlie really had snapped. But none of it fit. All I saw when I closed my eyes was the garden. That stupid 2-deep garden with soil Mason never let the dog near. I got 2 hours of sleep, if that. Woke up gasping from a dream where Charlie was barking somewhere I couldn't reach him. The second night was worse. The third night, I didn't sleep at all. At 2:14 a.m., I was sitting in Evelyn's recliner, with the lamp off, hands clasped together, like I was praying to someone who stopped listening months ago. That's when I heard it. Scratching. Soft at first. Then frantic. I thought I was imagining it. Grief makes you hear things. But then I heard a low, plaid whine. My heart stuttered. I walked to the sliding glass door, pulled the curtain back, and Frosty saw. There in the yard, covered in mud and blood, and shaking so hard he looked like he might collapse, was Charlie. Alive. Digging like the earth itself was trying to swallow something he needed to save. He didn't look at the house. Didn't look anywhere but that one spot. The spot in the garden Mason guarded like a secret. The spot that wasn't grief at all. The spot hiding something meant to stay buried. I didn't open the box right away. For a long moment, I just knelt there in the cold dirt. Charlie pressed weakly against my side, his breath shaky and undone. My hands hovered over the metal lid, while the whole world narrowed to the sound of my heartbeat and the thud of Charlie's tail, too drained to wag, but training anyway. I remember whispering, "It's okay, boy. I'm here, though." I'm not sure if I was saying it to him or to myself. When I finally lifted the latch, the hinges creaked, a tired metallic groan that sounded almost disappointed to be disturbed. Inside wasn't what I expected. It wasn't money. It wasn't drugs. It wasn't anything cinematic or simple. It was worse. It was personal. The first thing on top was a stack of folded papers. Official looking. Sharp corners. Government stamps. I didn't understand half the codes or numbers, but I recognized enough to feel the air leave my lungs. Financial forms, property transfers, debt, consolidation agreements with forged signatures. My signature. I hadn't signed a single one of them. Underneath that folder was another stack, photographs. Printed on glossy paper, the kind you get from those cheap, self-serve photo machines. My hands shook as I lifted them. Leah. Her face turned away, shoulders stiff, eyes red or swollen in most of them. Some looked like they were taken from a doorway, others from behind a car window. A few were zoomed in so tight it made my stomach twist. Her arm pulled, her jaw clenched, a bruise blooming beneath makeup she hadn't fully blended. My daughter being cataloged, like evidence, like property, like something owned. I didn't realize I was gripping the photos so hard until one bent in my hand. "Jesus," I whispered. "Jesus, what did he do to you?" Charlie shifted closer, resting the weight of his head against my knee. He let out a small sound, half whine, half exhaustion. I kept going, because a part of me already knew the worst wasn't on paper or film. At the bottom of the box was a small digital recorder. Old, scuffed. The same kind reporters used 15 years ago. I clicked play. Mason's voice filled the night air. Cold. Controlled. Too calm. "You think you can walk out After everything I've done for you. Silence. Then a softer sound, maybe a sob. Leah's voice quiet but shaking. Please, Mason, I didn't. You'll stay. You hear me? You stay. Or your father pays the price. My hands went numb. Another recording. I said, stop crying. You're making me look like the bad guy. Click. You want to know what happens if you talk to him? Go ahead. Try. See what happens to your old man. Click. That dog of his, it knows. I swear it looks at me, like it sees straight through. Might have to take care of that. Click. I stopped the recorder and set it down like it burned. The night felt colder, the garden darker, and my guilt heavier than anything I'd ever lifted at the plant. I had known something was wrong, that Leah wasn't smiling right anymore, that Mason's presence changed the air in the room, the way a storm does, pressure, tension, fear. But seeing it, hearing it, knowing it had crossed from suspicion to certainty, it gutted me. Charlie nudged my hand with his nose, as if reminding me why he'd clawed his way home, why he'd dug until his paws split. He hadn't been destroying the memorial. He'd been trying to save us. I grabbed my phone with dirt-covered fingers and called the one person I trusted to tell me the truth, no matter how ugly it was. Hank picked up on the second ring. Pete, it's 2:30 in the morning. What, I found something, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded older, tired, broken. In the garden, under Evelyn's roses. It's, Hank, it's bad. How bad? I looked at the open box. The papers, the photos, the recorder. The truth I had been too blind or too afraid to see. Worse than you told me to prepare for. There was a beat of silence, not confusion, confirmation. Stay there, Hank said. I'm coming. He arrived in 15 minutes, didn't bother knocking. Just walked into the yard with a flashlight, and that grim expression I'd only ever seen him wear at 2 funerals, his partner's and Evelyn's. When his light hit the box, he stopped breathing for a second. Peter, he said quietly, kneeling down, this is exactly what your wife feared. Evelyn. Her name hit me like a punch. Hank, I said, voice cracking. Did she know? Did she really know? She suspected, he said. And she hoped she was wrong. But she wasn't. I felt the whole weight of my failures roll over me. For not seeing it. For not protecting Leah. For letting Mason into our lives. For letting him stay. Hank placed one hand on the box, the other on my shoulder. There's more, he said. Something she left for you. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small sealed envelope, aged at the corners, my wife's handwriting on the front. For Peter. When it's time. I stared at it like it might disappear. Hank. Why now? He looked at me with eyes that had seen every kind of loss a man can carry. Because tonight, he said, the time finally came. The envelope felt lighter than it should have. Funny how something so thin can carry enough weight to crush a grown man. Evelyn's handwriting was on the front, the same looping cursive she used on birthday cards and grocery lists taped to the fridge. Seeing it in the cold beam of Hank's flashlight made my throat close. It was like she'd reached out from someplace I still wasn't ready to accept. She'd gone. I sat back on the damp grass. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely slide my thumb under the seal. The paper inside was soft, worn at the fold. She must have written it months before she died. Maybe longer. I unfolded it. The first line hit like a hammer. Peter, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't protect Leah the way I wanted to. Now it's your turn. I sucked in a breath so sharp it hurt. The letter continued, her tone steady, almost clinical, but beneath it, a tremble I knew too well. Evelyn only shook when she was terrified. I didn't tell you everything. I know that hurt you. I'm sorry. I couldn't risk making you see what I saw until I had something solid. Mason is dangerous, Pete. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind who whispers rules until they become truths. The kind who closes doors behind your daughter and opens them only when she apologizes for things she didn't do. My hands tightened. I've seen bruises Leah can't explain. I've heard the way she lowers her voice around him. I've watched her shrink inside herself. My vision blurred. I had to blink twice before I could keep reading. I tried to talk to her. She begged me not to. She swore he'd fix it. She swore it wasn't that bad. She swore she loved him. But fear makes people say anything, even to their mothers. I swallowed hard. The night air felt colder creeping into my spine. I asked Hank for help. Quiet help. The kind that doesn't alert Mason. He's been watching him. Carefully. The money. The late-night drives. The calls he hides. The people he meets with. Hank beside me didn't move, didn't speak. He just let me keep eyes. I don't know what Mason is involved in, but I know it's bad enough he's scared Leah into silence. Bad enough she thinks leaving would cost someone their life. Maybe mine. Maybe yours. The next sentence looked like she'd paused before writing it, ink darker pressed deeper. I think he would hurt her, Peter. Maybe he already has. Something in my chest cracked open, grief, guilt, anger, all wrapped together so tightly I couldn't separate them. Why hadn't I seen it? Why had Evelyn carried this alone? Why had I been so blind? The letter went on. I wanted to gather proof. Enough that no one, no judge, no cop, no smooth-talking son-in-law could twist it. I found some things. Hank found more. He said it needed to be hidden somewhere. Mason would never think to look. I chose the roses. My roses. I stared at the churned-up dirt where that box had been buried. My wife's memorial garden. Her place of peace, used as a vault. I didn't tell you because I needed to protect you from knowing too soon. You've always led with your heart. You'd confront him, and he'd strike first. But if he ever crossed the line, if he ever hurt that dog, if Leah ever seemed afraid of me or you, if something happened that made your bones feel cold, then it's time. I wiped at my face. My hand came away wet. Open the box. Call Hank. And Peter, listen to me. If I'm not here anymore, it's because God gave you the part of this fight I couldn't finish. Save our daughter. She is drowning quietly. Pull her out. The last line was almost a whisper. I love you. I always have. Even from the other side of the garden. Evelyn. I didn't realize I'd folded the letter against my chest until Hank placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. The man wasn't gentle often, but he was then. She knew, he said softly. Long before either of us did. I kept my eyes on the roses, Evelyn's roses, now disturbed, exposed, and truer than they had ever been, in full bloom. I failed her, I said. It came out hoarse. No, Hank said, squeezing my shoulder. She trusted you to do the hard part. The part she couldn't. And you're doing it now. I shook my head. I should have protected Leah. I should have seen people hide what they don't want to see. And Mason knew exactly how to make you doubt yourself. He knelt beside me, lowering his voice. But now we have everything. And he doesn't know we do. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. So what now? Hank glanced toward the house, then back toward the garden, the hole, the box, the dog leaning against my leg, like he'd been holding our family together with his teeth. There's only one way to bring a man like Mason down, he said. One way the law can't twist. One way he can't talk his way out of. I held my breath. We make him come back for what he buried. I looked at him confused. And when he does, Hank continued, voice low, steady, sure we catch him with his hands in the dirt. I didn't sleep the night before the dinner. Not from fear I could have handled. This was something different. A kind of cold clarity. The kind that settles into you when a line has been crossed and there's no going back to the softer version of yourself. By late afternoon, I'd set the table. Nothing fancy. Just plates, forks, a roast chicken I barely tasted while cooking. But the dining room felt like a courtroom, and I knew exactly who was on trial. I invited them at 6:30. Mason arrived at 6:29. He always liked to appear punctual, like a man with discipline. But the truth was simpler. He liked control. Showing up 1 minute early meant I'd open the door on his terms, not mine. He walked in ahead of Leah without looking back. That told me everything about their marriage. I should have seen years ago. Leah hovered behind him, shoulders, tucked hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Even in the early summer heat, she wore long sleeves. Her smile, thin, quick, apologetic, broke something in me. "Hey, Pete," Mason said, clapping a hand on my arm a bit too hard, marking territory more than greeting. He gave the air a quick sniff. "Smells good. You didn't go overboard, right?" we said casual. He scanned the table like he was checking for traps. If only he knew. We sat. I poured water. He poured himself too much wine. Leah didn't drink at all. Every time her fork scraped her plate, she flinched like she expected someone to correct her. The first 15 minutes were small talk. The kind of talk that used to irritate me. But now I studied every word, every twitch. Mason talked the most loudly, confidently. Too confidently. About work, about some new contract, about how he had big plans for the next year. He avoided looking at me for long stretches. When he did glance my way, that smile he wore was tight and thin like a rubber band stretched too far. He kept his injured hand hidden under the table, like he didn't want me to see it up close. Or like he didn't want it in his line of sight either. Leah barely said 10 words. Halfway through the meal, I made my move. I leaned back, casually, wiped my mouth with a napkin and said, "Mason, I've been thinking about the garden." He froze, not dramatically, not even noticeably to someone who didn't know what to look for. But his eyes widened just a fraction, and the muscle in his jaw twitched twice. "Yeah," he said lightly. "What about it?" "I'm gonna expand it," I said. "Make it bigger. More roses." Evelyn always wanted something fuller out there. Leah looked up quickly. Hope and fear tangled behind her eyes. Mason took a slow sip of wine. "Expand it," he repeated. "Yep," I said, injecting the voice I used to use when neighbors offered unsolicited advice. Gentle, harmless, old. Hired a landscaping crew. They start Monday morning, 8 sharp. Gonna dig up the whole thing and redo the layout. He set his glass down a bit too hard. The sound cracked through the quiet room. "You already hired someone?" he asked. The smile was still there, but it wasn't connected to anything behind his eyes. "Yup, signed the paperwork yesterday." His throat bobbed in a swallow he tried to hide. His hand slid off the table into his lap. Probably checking for his phone. Or maybe checking that the keys to whatever he buried were still where he left them. "That seems fast," Mason said, voice lower now. "I mean, that garden meant a lot." "It still does," I said. "That's why I want to make it better." He shook his head as if something didn't add up. "You sure you want strangers digging around out there? Could damage the soil, disturb the roots." He was trying too hard, speaking too precisely. It was the first time I'd ever seen him rattled. "It's fine," I said. "They'll take out everything." His eyes flashed quick, sharp panic before he buried it again under a practiced grin. "It's your yard," he said. "Just seems like a lot of work." Leah had gone pale as power. Her fork trembled in her hand. She didn't lift her eyes. I pushed forward. "Anyway," I said lightly, "should be interesting to see what they find." That did it. Mason's hand tightened around his wineglass until the veins on his wrist stood up like cables. A single drop of wine spilled onto the tablecloth, and he didn't even notice. He forced a laugh, tight, brittle. "Well, I'll Have to come by and make sure they're doing it right. Sure, I said. You do that. His knee bounced under the table. His breath was too shallow. He looked like a Martian doing math he wished he didn't have to do. A long minute passed. Then he stood abruptly. Gonna wash my hands, he muttered, walking out before anyone could respond. When he disappeared down the hall, the room felt like it could finally breathe. Leah sagged slightly in her chair, her hand rising instinctively toward her sleeve, almost like she was checking it was still in place. Leah, I whispered. She looked at me, eyes shiny and terrified. Dad, she said, voice nearly inaudible. I think he's going to hurt someone. A beat of silence passed between us. Who? I asked gently. She swallowed. Hard. I don't know, she whispered. You, me, anyone who gets between him and whatever he's hiding. Her voice trembled with something worse than fear, certainty. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Leah straightened. The mask slid back on. The moment evaporated. Mason reappeared, drying his hands on a towel he'd grabbed without asking. Everything good in here? He asked, smiling, like nothing in the world was wrong. I smiled back like an old fool. Just fine, I said. But the truth sat between us, sharp and heavy. He knew I was onto him. I knew he was cornered, and he had no idea the trap was already set. I didn't turn on a single light that night. Didn't sit. Didn't lie down. Just stood in my own living room, like a ghost wearing my body, watching the backyard through a slit in the curtains, while the rest of the house held its breath with me. Hank had left an hour earlier, his voice calm, his eyes anything but. Feds are in place, he'd said, hand on my shoulder. 2 in the neighbor's garage, 1 in the alley. A surveillance van down the block. You stay inside no matter what. You hear me, Pete? I heard him. But I didn't know if I could obey him. I felt like everything I'd failed to protect, Evelyn, Leah, Charlie, stood right outside that window waiting for me to find a spine. I seemed to have misplaced somewhere in my 60s. The clock ticked past midnight. 1:20 a.m., 2:06 a.m. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every passing car felt like an omen. My mind kept drifting to the letter Evelyn left me, to the parts I reread until they were carved into me like scripture. Peter, if I'm no longer there, promise me you won't wait for someone else to save Leah. That line burned deepest. By 2:38 a.m., fatigue sat on my shoulders like wet cement, but I stayed upright, stayed watching. And then I saw headlights. Not bright, not bold, creeping, coasting. A car moving without wanting to be seen. My pulse jumped so hard I felt it in my teeth. The engine cut 3 houses down, the same way Derek had done in the original story. But now, this wasn't just Derek. This wasn't just a desperate man coming to dig up evidence. This was something darker, something organized. 2 figures stepped out. One was Mason. The other was bigger, broader. A man whose whole posture said he'd spent most of his life making people disappear. Hank had warned me. Guys like Mason don't bury things on it. Collectors don't forgive mistakes. I watched the pair move fast along the side fence, slipping into my yard like shadows. No talking. Their movements too rehearsed, too familiar. Mason was shaking. The collector wasn't. He pushed Mason forward with a hard jab to the ribs. Mason stumbled toward the memorial garden, my Evelyn's roses, like a man walking to his own execution. The collector flicked on a flashlight. Narrow beam. Cold light. I could hear them now. Their breath, not their words. Mason's was ragged, desperate. The collector's was slow, steady, patient. I crouched lower behind the curtain, heart hammering so loudly I was sure anyone could hear it. The collector handed Mason a shovel with a shove. Mason's bandaged hand shook around the handle. He tried speaking, maybe making excuses, maybe begging, but all that came out was a choke that died in his throat. The collector didn't care. He just pointed at the same damn corner Charlie had died trying to expose. And Mason started digging. The shovel struck the dirt with a thud that cut straight through me. Another thud. And another. The earth was soft. Charlie and I had torn through it days before, so it didn't take long. Soon, Mason's breathing turned to sobs without sound as the metal hit the top of the container. The collector stepped closer. His boots sank slightly into the turned soil. Mason fumbled with the box, his fingers slipping, his body trembling. He lifted the lid. The collector's flashlight slid across the contents: documents, photos, recordings, proof of everything Evelyn feared, proof she died carrying alone. Mason's voice cracked. "It's all here. I wasn't trying to. I just needed time. I was going to." The collector didn't let him finish. With slow, deliberate calm, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. My stomach dropped so fast I had to brace myself against the window frame. Even from inside the house, I could see the way Mason froze, shoulders tight, head tilted, as if hoping he misread the gesture. But he hadn't. He knew that posture, that angle, that inevitability. Collectors don't come to dig up evidence. Collectors come to close accounts. Mason lifted his hands, palms out, shaking so violently it looked like his bones were rattling inside his skin. "I can fix this," he whispered. "I swear, I can move it tonight. I'll—" The collector raised the gun higher, close enough now that I could almost hear the click of his thumb on the hammer. I wanted to look away, but I didn't. Couldn't. This was the man who terrorized Leah, who tried to kill Charlie, who used my Evelyn's grave as a hiding place. And now he was about to face the same kind of darkness he'd dragged into our family. But I also saw something else in Mason's eyes, something I hadn't expected. A terrified little boy. A boy who'd never learned to love without controlling. Never learned strength without cruelty. Never learned fear until now. For half a heartbeat, I almost felt sorry for him. Then the collector spoke, deep, calm. "Final, you buried the wrong thing." And he leveled the gun at Mason's chest. For a moment, I truly believed I was about to watch a man die in my backyard. Not because I wanted that outcome. God knows I've seen enough endings for one lifetime. But because the collector's heart rate didn't change not one beat when he raised the gun toward Mason's chest. Then the night cracked open. A sharp command: "Federal agents." Drop the weapon. Split the darkness so violently, my whole body jerked. Floodlights snapped to life. From behind the tool shed, from the alley, from the neighbor's yard, where a federal agent had been hiding behind an overturned wheelbarrow for nearly 4 hours. The collector spun, startled, not scared, just calculating. He bolted for the fence, dropping the flashlight, leaving Mason the box, everything he'd come for. Agents swarmed the yard like they'd rehearsed it a dozen times. But the collector was fast. Faster than any man his size had a right to be. 2 agents chased him toward the alley. Another cut him off near the gate. I heard the scramble boots in gravel, a grunt, someone hitting a trash bin, and then the heavy, unmistakable thud of a body being brought to the ground. A voice called out, "Suspect contained." I didn't know whether to exhale or collapse. But it wasn't over. Because Mason didn't run. He didn't freeze either. The second the collector took off, something snapped inside him, some animal instinct, to erase the evidence before anyone could touch it. He dropped to his knees, clawing at the box, ripping out the documents, crumpling photos, trying to bury everything back under the dirt with his bare hands. He was crying angry tears, frantic tears, but crying nonetheless. "No, no, no. This wasn't supposed to. I can fix this. I can fix this." An agent shouted for him to get his hands up. He didn't. He just kept tearing, shredding, trying to disappear the truth grain by grain. And that's when he saw me. I'd stepped out onto the porch without realizing it, drawn by something deeper than fear. Maybe it was Evelyn's voice in my head. Maybe it was Leah's bruises under her sleeves. Maybe it was Charlie's blood matted into his fur when he limped home. Whatever it was, it pulled me into the open. Our eyes locked. His expression changed in ways I can't forget. Shock, anger, humiliation, and something like betrayal twisted into one ugly shape. "You," he choked out. "You set me up." He lunged. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't strategic. It was pure collapsing desperation, one final attempt to regain control over something, anything. I didn't even move. 60 years of running from confrontation. And I just stood there. But I wasn't alone. From the side yard, a low growl rumbled like thunder. Charlie. Hank had brought him, kept him in his truck until the signal came in, wanting him close, but not in danger. The moment Mason charged, Hank opened the door. Charlie didn't attack, didn't bite, didn't slam Mason into the dirt like a police dog would have years ago. He did something far more powerful. He stepped between us, stood there worn out, limping slightly, fur still rough from injuries, and planted himself like an old soldier who knew his job wasn't over. Mason skid to a halt inches from his muzzle. Charlie didn't growl again. He didn't have to. Sometimes protection is just presence. Agents tackled Mason from behind, pulling him down, pinning his arms. He fought, kicking, thrashing, shouting half-formed threats at no one and everyone. "Get off me," I said. "I can fix this. I can. I can fix everything." They rolled him to his stomach, cuffed his wrists, read him his rights. My knees were shaking so badly I had to brace myself against the porch railing. Hank rushed to my side. "You okay, Pete?" The word caught. "I'm still standing." He nodded, eyes softer than any man his size should have. "That counts." We both turned as they lifted Mason to his feet. Sweat streaked his face, dirt under his nails, shirt torn, hair plastered to his forehead. He looked less like a villain and more like a man who'd been running from consequences so long he forgot what they looked like. As the agents walked him toward the gate, he twisted back to look at me. And for the first time that night, maybe the first time ever, his voice went calm, almost eerie. "Peter," he said, "ask Leah what she signed for me." A beat. Ask her if she even knew. The words hit harder than any punch he could have thrown. Because I could tell from the flatness in his tone, from the dead look in his eyes, that whatever he meant wasn't just cruel. It was true. They say the dust settles after a storm. Whoever wrote that never lived through the kind that tears a family open from the inside. The week after Mason's arrest felt like moving through water-heavy cold, every breath work. Leah and I spent more time in sterile rooms than at home. Interviews, statements, federal investigators asking questions that made my daughter fold into herself like a wounded bird. When they showed her the documents, Mason had forced her to sign mortgage transfers, shell company forms, transactions that traced straight to the box he buried under Evelyn's roses. She broke. Not loud, not dramatic, just broke. Her shoulders collapsed inward. Her mouth trembled like she was trying to hold her own breath still. And then she whispered the same words over and over. "I didn't know. Dad, I didn't know." I gathered her up before she slid off the chair, held her like I hadn't held her since she was 8 years old, with a nightmare she couldn't describe. "It's not your fault," I said. I didn't whisper it. I wanted her to hear it all the way down into the parts of herself Mason had convinced were worthless. She sobbed into my shirt, deep, guttural, exhausted sobs, and every tear felt like a thread pulling her back from the place she'd been trapped for years. For the first time since Evelyn died, I cried too, quietly, because I didn't want my daughter to carry that weight alone anymore. Mason pled guilty in the end. Not because he found remorse. Men like him don't grow that suddenly. He pled because the evidence was ironclad. Because the collector turned state's witness to save his own skin. Because the feds found digital trails Mason thought he'd erased. When the judge read the sentence, 18 years, no early release, Leah's hand squeezed mine so tight it hurt. But I didn't let go. Walking out of that courthouse felt like stepping into a new world. Not a perfect world. Not healed, but possible. Leah started therapy the next week. The first time she came back to my house afterward, she looked tired but lighter. She sat at the kitchen table stirring her tea without drinking it, as Charlie lay across her feet like he'd always belonged there. "Dad," she said quietly, "I'm trying." "That's all any of us can do," I answered. She nodded, eyes shining. "Can I stay here a while? Just until I get steady." "You don't even have to ask," I said. And I meant it. Every word. As for the garden, I tore the whole thing out, all of it, every plank Mason touched, every stone he'd placed, every trace of the lie he built over the truth my wife died trying to reveal. And then I rebuilt it, slowly, with my own hands, with trembling knees and stiff shoulders, but with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. I planted Evelyn's favorite roses soft pink, modest, the color she always said looked like kindness. I added a birdbath she once pointed out in a catalog and said we'd buy when we stopped putting everything off. I placed her picture at the center, not in a frame, just laminated simple, as if she were keeping watch. Or maybe guiding us still. Sometimes at dusk, I sit there with Charlie resting against my leg. He's healing. Older, a bit slower pause, still tender in some spots, but whole. A survivor. Like us. Growing old is not what I thought it'd be. I lost my wife. I nearly lost my daughter. I nearly lost myself. But loss has a strange way of stripping life down to the things that matter. The things you fight for. The things you rise for. Grief didn't take my purpose. It gave me a new one. Family isn't the people you start with, it's the people you stay for. I stay for Leah, for Charlie, for the memory of the woman who tried to save us long before we ever listened. And I stay for the man I'm still becoming even at 60. You know, when all this finally ended, people kept asking how a man my age got through it. Truth is, I didn't. Not at first. I broke. I bent. I blamed myself for things I didn't see and things I saw too late. But somewhere in the mess, I realized getting older doesn't mean you stop fighting. It just means you fight differently. Quieter. With more heart than muscle. I got my daughter back. I rebuilt something honest in the place where lies used to grow. And every morning when I step into that garden, I don't think about what we lost anymore. I think about what we're choosing to live for. So if you're out there feeling like life passed you Bawasi, trust me, it didn't. It's waiting right where you left yourself the last time you were brave.